All views of our guests in our podcast are theirs. We are just bringing them to you. Please use your own judgment. Hello and welcome to Vidcast, where you'll find podcasts on various topics but compiled with a common core belief that we can improve our lives with the right attitude, awareness, and spirit. Our podcasts are like an online sangha, a satsang of sorts, with people who matter, people whose opinions and actions and beliefs have shaped our society. We have as a guest on today's podcast Padma Srinath. Padma Srinath has been in the early childhood field for well over 4 decades. She believes strongly in following the children's developmental needs to frame a curriculum which has more of talking rather than shocking. She has been associated with the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan and the London Montessori Teacher Development Programs. She has also been associated with the Vidya Mandir schools, the Alcott Memorial School, and the American International School in their early childhood division. She is an accredited workshop facilitator for the Oxford University Press. She believes that the foundation of how to learn is accommodated in the first 7 years of life, and hence the environment is a critical factor in consideration. Along with her in conversation is Maya Nayar, a certified school psychologist and a learning disabilities teacher consultant in the US public education system. Over to both of them. Hello, Padma.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Nanda. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Hi, Maya.
Hi.
15 or 20 years ago, I went to the UK on some project, and I remember the teacher there saying, I won't be here because she was, retiring and all that. But I know that the web, like the Spider-Man, will carry things all over. I keep thinking of her so much. Every day there's a podcast that I listen to or whatever.
I don't know if Uma kind of briefed you. Maya's with the school system here.
Mm-hmm.
And she
did give a very small brief to say that she was working with special needs and she was also into math thinking and so on.
Yeah.
Both of which are my pet peeves, if you might say so. Give you an introduction of myself. I didn't choose teaching as a purpose of my life.
I know.
That was not my intended pathway, but I stumbled into it because somebody asked me to help a special needs child. And
correct, with cerebral palsy, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I happened to meet one of the most brilliant minds of this country, Dr. Ramurthy, who gave me a very simple tip. And the tip led me to think about many, many things that we ought to keep in mind if we wish to deal with such children to make progress. Because as far as he is concerned, he said, every child wants the same thing. They want to become an adult with a purpose, with meaningfulness, and doing something nice in the world. So to me, that's how I started, and I thought, why not?
Yeah, well, something very interesting that I heard about you when you were, one of your statements, you said you should respect children as adults, as equals, rather.
Which is, not as adults, as equals.
As equals, yeah. I misspoke. As equals. I think that's awesome because I've always thought that way. I had a gut and we raised 3 children and I've always treated them as equals. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of sense in what you said.
Nanda, I have a very clear dimension of what life is. It's a matrix.
Okay.
I think Maya will understand the term matrix where there are quadrants.
Yes.
And we go through quadrants right from the moment of conception, I think. First quadrant being in the womb. And therefrom right up to the day where we disappear into infinity.
Absolutely. Very interesting.
That's an extremely brilliant thing. And why not make it a rainbow?
Right.
If we need to think about making it a rainbow, there is no we and they between adults and children. I think there is always the desire to show maturity, which is the common bottom line of human beings, whether it be with an adult who is 60, 70, or whether it be with the child who is little and who is on the pathway to acquiring that maturity. It's the most common used word, no? He's pretty immature to say that, or, oh, in his immaturity, he must have said it, or they're stupid, or he doesn't yet understand, etc., etc.
Right.
To me, that's not at all a considered dimension of child rearing, though, because we think they don't know, particularly in today's era.
But do you think there is this one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach to bringing up children, or do you think it's a gut feel more than anything else?
Certainly not. Certainly not. Just as one size fits all is not the mantra for many dimensions of existence, okay? I think it is important for us to understand that every child, if you go by the consideration of a child-directed input, will be unique. So there will be one level of the matrix which will be common, which is what comes into play when you see the common dimensions offered in child rearing or for children, like, for instance, fairy tales. It's a common plethora for everybody. It's one size fits all, yes, but it has layers and layers and layers, which involves dimensions and dimensions and dimensions, which is what we're trying to unfold to bring in maturity.
So when you say layers, do you the same story can have different meanings to different children? Is that what you say?
Whether it has a different meaning or a response, I'm a big advocate of using a dimension where children experience something before they are given a certain information, okay? The experience needs, I think, to show for a child all the dimensions he is experiencing as a child, which is the issues that counter his big need to have trust in whatever is around him, be it the room, the world, the people, the things he eats, the survival dimension, etc., which is the first matrix that Erikson talks in terms of the personality itself. And if you talk of fairy tales, it addresses exactly that. It deals with hopes. It deals with fears. It deals with inadequacies. It deals with magic. Because the future is a magic to anybody at all, right?
Right. Yeah, and I it wasn't recent. Quite some time back, I had read. I don't know the name of the author, but the nursery rhyme Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of. Jack came rolling down and broke his crown. I mean, they are so violent, right?
I don't think there's a question of violence. If you interpret it as violence, yes. But I think in the days when children can slip and fall, between the age of crawling and standing, how many times hasn't every child fallen?
Yeah, but breaking his head.
That's a common input. So they don't use it as, oh, somebody is throwing me down the hill. They don't perceive that. Depending on the voice you tell them. He was thrown out like Krishna, Kamsa through Krishna, is what we would say in a myth. But Jack and Jill just rolled down the hill. And don't forget that this is placed in Western society, where the hills and dales are part of every vision.
Right. So I was leading to that, in fact. So are they kind of appropriate for a typical Indian child growing in an Indian environment?
Absolutely, because as far as I'm concerned, the bottom line is that it addresses hopes, fears, inadequacies, and brings in a maturity that is projected as a framework. And life is a framework. Life anywhere, because we are morphic resonators. So whether the morpha is an Indian, or whether the morpha is a tribal, or whether the morpha is American or British or Chinese or Mongolian, the morpha is the same. COVID is telling us that, right?
Yes, but I was, it's. Do you think that is there any? Let me ask you this way: Genetically, do you think any kind of information is passed on to the child about the environments, the culture, and stuff like that? Does genetics prepare a child for a particular environment?
I think foundationally, the brain as it develops moves through different phases. I'm sure Maya would hold me on that.
Yes.
The first is just a reptilian brain. When the child is only on its back, and the next thing he knows in development is only to go on his tummy and move. And the very development of needing to become a standing dimension, a homo sapien, if one might use that big word, is a brain development correlate.
Homo erectus, as they say, right?
Yes, okay. Homo erectus is the right word. So the bottom line is that we all go through the stages of being the reptilian dimension and then the mammalian dimension, and then we come into the level of being the man, standing with our backbone. And there's such a joy that in a baby's face when he stands, and we also, give
Clap.
him wow, come on, you stood up, wow, he's walking, etc., etc. Next stage, of course, is the walking stage. But to me, the development of these dimensions will have a genetic composition.
Right.
Probably a DNA and an RNA combined, if one might talk in today's language.
Right,
okay?
right.
But it also has every thought that comes in is not devoid of an emotional facet.
You mean it's
I'm
reinforced?
talking of it as a facet.
Okay.
So a thought of being in the reptilian stage is common to any child anywhere in the world. African, Aborigine, educated, name it. Okay. So to me, that dimension allows for a certain build-up of this network within the brain, which becomes a framework. And that framework, as it goes on, incorporates, I'm using the word very carefully, incorporates the culture experience of each child. And that might make a difference, the cultural intake that the child has. And it would include all the dimensions that say, how do you deal with hope? For instance, for an Indian child, you might say, pray, 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 pray. Oh God, Hanuman, please come and take this away, or whatever it is. But if you took the story of, let's say, Alice in Wonderland, you become so small from the big to the little so that you can even go inside the rabbit hole. Right? And you can crawl, and then there's a fantasy world out there.
Right. So actually,
So question over here is the hopes, the fears as a bottom line is the same world over. And so what happens, I think, in the question of a narrative like a fairy tale, what does a narrative like that do? I think it presents life as a framework. The dimension that I call the little cubes of the matrix, you might put it in another matrix, but it still is a kind of a framework that you start resonating with because emotions are the same.
Are we running the danger of compartmentalizing these things into matrices in the sense of matrices?
No, never.
Matrices.
Sorry. No, matrix, I think Maya will tell you, is overlapping, and it moves without a
row and columns.
It's a wall without, school without walls, if one might use in American terminology, and that's life. You never sit and say, when I was 12 years old, this happened, and that is why I'm thinking like this. No, it just builds into your thinking, If you analyze yourself, Nandan, I'm sure you'll find how beautifully flowing it is. And that's why we say life flows like a river. Okay. So essentially, the framework allows a scope for the projection of child fears. And the typical narrative is say, don't tell, don't read. So they want you to tell the story, and you will find consequent to that tell, it will be the repeat.
So is this what you mean by seeking by perception instead of reading?
So, so it is not seeking by perception, but it is building perception through an intelligence that in today's world is not developed consciously, which is intuition.
Right. Let me bring Maya in for this. You have taught both in India and in the US. So, do you find any commonality with the kids? The backgrounds, the culture, the grasping power, the critical thinking.
Because here, the whole thing on teaching is what I found is, I mean, I taught in India 20 years ago, so I'm sure it changed. But here, it's as Mr. Inath rightly mentioned, it's all about experiencing.
She wanted to call her Padma.
Oh, Padma. Okay. So it's all about experiencing. So everything is involvement. You learn by being involved. So when I used to teach mathematics in the earlier years, it was just you have to actually, there's manipulatives and you have to involve them, whatever it is, division, multiplication. It has to be involvement. And they always stressed on learning being, it's learning by experiencing.
Okay.
It's whereas in India, it was, I must say that mathematics was abstract, kind of abstract when we learned, and also when I was teaching. When I came, I was just so floored by the way that they put things in perspective to the kids so that the retention was much more compared to how we learned. And so that reminds me of a saying, tell me and I forget. Teach me and I may remember. Involve me and I learn. So that's one of that's how we go about here.
Maya, can I add on to what you are saying?
Yes.
When one talks about the concept of literacy being the framework in which language is developed, whatever be the language, a language which is alien to you or the local language or whatever it is, just that numeracy as a concept should precede number system. The reason that it is all abstract is today because of this silly dimension of thinking academics is all prime. We are jumping into abstraction, thinking the quicker we jump into abstraction, the better they will do as adults. They don't realize that learning can only anchor when emotion is intertwined with it in a neural network.
Absolutely. Yes. And that is what we here it's what we do is every year it's all data. Like we keep looking at the data. They say it's you don't have to really, but I have found a lot of information from this. We actually pinpoint where the student is lacking every year because of the standardized testing that we have. We don't have exams here. We don't have tests, quizzes, like how it's done in India, quarterly, half yearly. We don't have all that here, at least in the lower grades. So what we do is they just go by this data and they just kind of pinpoint where the student is lacking or where he or she is having a problem, and then they homogenize the groups. They homogenize the groups into different levels and start teaching them into, in those groups, the higher level, the lower, the mid-level and the lower level, up to a certain point, up to the age of maybe 13, 14. And once they get into high school, that's a different thing.
So I think fundamentally what I'm trying to say is that we have to have a kind of a phonemic awareness, as we say, before we go into phonetic understanding as far as the framework of language, which is alphabets or whatever is presented to a child, which means they should hear so many words that intertwine so many things together. Likewise, I'm saying that if a child under 5 or 7 years is flooded with numeracy experiences, I think there is a different networking that allows for why this number system. And I think also in my personal view, the present number system needs a rethink. I don't think it should be 1 to 10, but it should be 0 to 9, because that is a framework then that repeats. And if that is considered, place value becomes a plaything, which is a bugbear in most primary children to understand what is this thing called place value. And that's just an example of
but how
what I'm talking
do you
about.
explain zero to a child?
Oh, everything. Zero is very easily understood by a child, because the game that you play, peekaboo. What is the game peekaboo? Where are my eyes? Now gone. Hey, here. Where's my face? Hey, here. So it's gone. It's there. That means nothingness to somethingness. The first level of understanding, 0 to 1. Nanda, I'm a big votary of, I think, what is called the lost realm, which is the stories that I think children need as a baseline of understanding life, which is in child rearing today in India, particularly, which is the broader base of my experience, is lost. Okay. Why? Because I think children are already dealing with many issues of maturity, any level of moving, transcending a level of maturity calls for dropping of anxieties or doubts within ourselves. And if there is got to be something like that in almost a safe dimension, nothing can be better than putting your head on the shoulder of either your father or mother and listening that, Rose decided to marry the big giant animal in Beauty and the Beast. And you will find the child's leg cuddling with yours to get that security. And then saying, really? But he won't eat her? No, he won't. Listen to what he did. And when you bring that tone into hopefulness, into a dimension says there's a way, the child will never stop, because the most common words that you hear from a child, and then after that, and after that, tell me again. Maya, do you agree?
Yes, absolutely.
Now go to sleep now. It's time you went to bed, right?
Right.
But I think those are the telling words that Dr. Ramurthy alerted me to. Why are they saying, tell me more? They want to know what is the end. They can't wait till tomorrow, because there are 3 layers of the mind, all of which participate in a fairy tale: the subconscious, the unconscious, and the conscious. To put it in the right level, unconscious and the subconscious and the conscious. And these have to be in perfect alignment if you have to trek the pathway of maturity, which is the ultimate goal of an adult, right? To face the world, which we don't know when we are 5 years old what it will be like, but to show the maturity that you can deal with it.
Well,
Underline.
spiritually, if you if you can transgress all these 3 states, you're an enlightened being. So how many people can actually be in the states of unconscious, conscious, and subconscious, and know that they're in these states?
You don't need to know, Nanda, and all of us go through it. As a child, he expresses the fear.
Okay.
As a child, he uses the scaffold by putting his leg onto your leg and stays there till it sleeps. In half sleep, you try taking out that leg and it'll come back, and then you'll realize he hasn't slept. Maya, right?
Yes.
So
that's a pre-operational.
Yes,
stage.
It's a pre-operational stage.
Yeah.
So if we are conscious that these are all things child is expressing to us, not we are teaching the child, so to speak. I think the whole ball game is that we are spiritual beings, as is a child who's born, and he has these layers which he is trying to align in the matrix.
Right. Are these layers like the layers of an onion? So you keep peeling them and there's nothing inside?
There will never be that stage, because maturity in the world is a changing organism.
Okay.
It's an organism and it's changing. Did we ever think that we will be sitting at home thinking about COVID?
Just to play the devil's argument, yes, there was the scare of a pandemic striking at some point. People did talk about it as early as even 5-7 years back. But at that point in time, probably people thought it was a work of fiction or a work of a feverish mind.
So 5 and 7 years is very little in terms of
yeah, absolutely.
Or a fairy tale, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or the development of the mind. Mind is energy, and in Einstein's words, it's always there, right?
Right, absolutely.
It's always there.
Yeah.
Again, talking only in terms of spirituality that we are referring to.
Right. So you had also encouraged that the child questions the why.
Yes, the why child by Mahasweta Devi is one of the most telling books. It should really become, I think, a whole terms books, because not just the story, but to look at children's lives, girls' lives, and what can I do with questions? And if the child raises the question, so be it, and that will form the lesson for the next day.
So, and you had said that preservation of the why is extremely important, because that will lead to a famous researcher in the future. Because if the questioning mind will always seek answers.
Of course, it'll lead you to research till you get the answer, right? And, I think the other thing that I'd like to emphasize really about the world, and you're talking about unconscious, I take you back there, is to think about metaphors, okay? Metaphors is such a critical dimension of conveyance of a mood, an idea, intuitively.
Right.
So the child has to trigger his intuitive intelligence, which he does very naturally, to understand a metaphor.
Right.
And I think in terms of the metaphor, it allows three things to happen. One, it allows a perception. The perception happens through the metaphor, because there are two frames simultaneously operating in the child's mind. And then there is a structure that connects the two frames. And then it only explains the world. It doesn't explain the composition of those pictures at all. It takes you to the realm of what is the world.
But is there a danger of a child imagining a parallel universe, say, for example?
What would be the danger? The child would develop a certain perception. Maturity will seek in if there is a scaffold of a meaningful teacher parent who will then guide the child to understand what these are and how we move.
So
a child will suffer with the phobia, saying, oh, will my mother die? Only if he is anchored in a fear. And that has to be dealt with very, very gently and very, very carefully, I would say. So in other words, when we narrate to a child with his head on your shoulder, and allowing that proximity of a symbiotic understanding, I think what we're doing is allowing the child to reflect his inner self onto your narration. I'm saying a very, very important aspect.
Right.
If we are willing to see that inner self of a child, that it exists and that we have to nourish it, as much as we decide that, we have to give him his protein today or his supplement,
okay, the
world would be a different place.
So how do we gather a critical mass of people like you to change the thinking of, the education system in India? Why restricted to India, even to the world?
strangely, you're talking to me about something that a friend talked to me last night. And I was telling her that rather than sending lessons online to children, the principals in India should be conversing with each other, irrespective of which board they belong to. We are dealing with children. How do we deal with these minds? What kind of changes can we begin to incorporate? What kind of messages can we incorporate with our own teachers to make that change possible? What is the teaching and learning the teachers have to get in this, 6 weeks or whatever time, that we have the common dimension? And so there should be shared resources.
Right.
There should be that oneness concept that everybody is today advocating between all the principals, irrespective of the board. The board is not important. The board is just giving you different pathways in curriculum. But that's not what we're talking of. We're talking about how do we develop that child instead of just looking at the academic.
Again, just to play the devil's advocate, even with all this rotten system, we've had the chairman of Google, well, the CEO, what is he? Sundar Pichai, what's his designation?
Pichai.
Yeah. And we have
I think he's a
Satya
CEO.
Nadella. Would I be...
Yes,
would-
Mr. Devil. Yes, Mr. Devil, let me tell you that in the scores of children that we are producing, generation after generation, you are picking one or two. There is only one sun to all the planets.
Right.
That may be enough. But we can have many, many more.
Yeah, so I was actually trying to pursue the argument even further in the sense that if these systems were in place during their childhood.
Absolutely, absolutely. Also, the dimension that this tells you that there is such a magnificent force within the human being called the mind, which he will break those barriers that education gives him and will break through. It is when the conditioning becomes so pronounced that breaking the barrier becomes difficult, and it calls for a different kind of strength, because after all, only Hanuman could lift the Sanjeevani hill, right? Because he couldn't identify the herb, otherwise he would have just brought the herb. A metaphor again for you.
So in conclusion, would we say that all children are born equal, Padma? Maya, what do you think? Let Padma answer
All
first and then.
children are born with the equal opportunity for the simple reason that if you looked at the number of neurons physically in a human brain, they are the same. What happens in the course of building life is that these neurons network, and when they are not networked, the brain decides to prune because the brain has to supply energy.
Okay.
Maya?
Yes, absolutely. I agree.
Because of experience.
Yes.
For God's sake, that pruning can be conditioning. Please let me give you some little dimension here, which is that what happens in childhood is that there is a dimension that pressurizes us, which becomes self-oriented, right? To own a name, we have to own who am I, me, myself, the theme of early childhood. And therefore, this dimension should not anchor as an ego that becomes narcissistic.
But the child has a certain amount of self-preservation, isn't it? Do you think it's born out of that?
Definitely, but we need to permit the child to explore the dimensions of the world and the fears and the hopes and the challenges that it will present, so that the child is able to incorporate in the matrix the sense of oneness, because then comes from that story itself resilience, and with resilience builds empathy. Maya, you agree?
Yes. Yes. Because I have seen whatever you have mentioned, because I have a different experience here. My experience is with a lot of diverse populations from different countries, and where I'm employed, it's inner, if you understand the meaning of the inner city schools, where there's a lot of poverty, and there is mostly single parents and a lot of substance abuse, and it's not exactly, it's not conducive for a child to be in that environment. But in spite of that, they come to school, they attend school every day, and we have this plethora. We have the counselor, we have the clinicians, we have everybody, because they know, the system knows, or the board of education knows this is what it is. So we try to shelter, protect them, and give them all the accommodations and the tools for them to succeed.
I think for children to hold a sense of hope into the future, which is a criticality of every little child before he enters that age of adulthood, 18, I think he should have the confidence that he is developing his inner resources. And those inner resources are not visible to anybody at all, much less to the others who see him. But he might know what resource is tapping at his chest. Okay? And therefore, listening to the child, I think, becomes so critical in order that the child understands that there is an inner self in the first place. I am reminded of a book. I don't know if I'm allowed to use names or whatever, but there is
go ahead. Please go ahead.
Into the Magic Shop. Have you encountered this book?
The Magic
Shop?
Shop?
A surgeon, Into the Magic Shop.
Uh-huh.
And it's a very simple book of a 9-year-old boy who goes to the magic shop. And it chances that the owner of the shop is not there, but the mother is there dealing with the shop. And he goes there to buy an artificial thumb so he can, impress an inner school kid. He can impress the others because he's had a very bad backdrop that, he doesn't want to present his story to children. And when he goes there and this lady puts her glasses on her nose and looks at him and gives him whatever he wants, but she asks him, you're going into the summer vacation. Do you want to learn some real magic? And he said, what do you mean real magic? Yeah, this is what you're going to put on a thumb and fool people that you've got a thumb when you cut it off, right? But I will tell you how you can place a real magic. And he says, yes. Then she says, you've got to give me your entire summer commitment. And the boy says, yes. And she says, it's for the asking. And she takes him into a journey, which is the story revealed in the Into the Magic Shop. And it is that story where this boy who comes from the kind of backdrop that Maya was describing, alcoholic backdrop, and a mother in complete depression with food only available, in the school and stuff like that, and wanting to go there every day and show off to the people because they belong to a peer group and they want to be with that peer group. It's a natural dimension of every child anywhere in the world. And when he does that, you won't believe what he becomes. He becomes a neurosurgeon. Wow. Believe that. You have to read that book to know. The first very question is very simple. She asks the boy to sit in front of a mirror and use his name and say, let's say, hello, Padma. And you're looking at your own abstract image, which you can't hold, but you're saying, hello, Padma. So who is that Padma who looks like Padma and you're saying hello to and you can't hold? That's the first introduction to an inner self. We seldom do these kind of things with each child, right?
Yeah.
And I think today we are in a world where if we allow this inner self understanding to happen at the right moment, right age, and in the right platform, I think the oneness will come into the global presence.
Which would be great. I mean, it would. It almost borders on a utopian thinking, but I guess it's possible.
Let's think utopian. Didn't the child think that it'll all be fairies and godmothers and crowns and I'll be princess. It doesn't matter. They didn't become neurotic or schizophrenic when they grew up. At least I didn't.
Yeah, I wish we were able to conjure all those images that.
Read the book, Nanda.
Yeah,
read
I will.
the
I
book.
will. I most certainly will.
It's a very simple book.
Yeah.
It's a very rapid reading book,
Uh-huh.
but I am amazed. They've even given a new connotation to the letters of the alphabet, Maya, which will absolutely blow you, I'm sure. Do let
Okay.
me know when that happens.
Sure.
We will, certainly
Sure,
will.
sure. Definitely.
So thank you so much, Padma. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and it's such a
much.
eye opener,
Thanks for
actually.
Thanks for asking me. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.